Hello everyone, this is Yours Trivia. Welcome back to another faction preview video for the Fates Divided DLC, and today we'll take a look at Ma Teng's faction. So Ma Teng is now playable in the 200 start, and his faction remains largely unchanged, that he's not one of the feature factions in this DLC, so more or less we're looking at his starting position and taking a look at what some of your early game decisions might be, and taking a look at his roster, which is mostly family, but we do have a few other characters. Unique features are still the same. You're still a governor. You have the interesting mechanic of restoring the actual emperor this time as a governor. Although I could also debate whether Ma Teng should be a governor in the first place, since he's not really a loyalist. If anything, he is a rebel that teamed up with the Teng forces out west and later rejoined the Han under, Li Jue and Guo Si's faction when they were in control of the emperor. So I wouldn't call that technically the official Han government, but that's a debate for another time. The characters the same. You still have the same faction bonuses, very good silk and spice income, recruitment discounts and upkeep cost discounts for your town units. You will start off even older, but your son will be ready of age for you to use. In terms of your starting situation, you actually don't have much land. You have a little piece of Wudu over here, and you have an enemy in Hansui to the north, which is a bit too early historically speaking. But I do like the starting setup for Ma Teng, because often we see Ma Teng as the stronger faction out west, when in fact Hansui was stronger than Ma Teng for pretty much the whole period. So seeing that Hansui as more of the dominant force out west is probably better. Looking at the shading, all of this is abandoned, right? You can see all the way to Hexi and even over here, this shade is abandoned. All of this is not under anyone's control, and I'm assuming Hansui would extend his control into Wu Wei here as well, so we just don't see that portion yet. So that's your early game enemy, and to the south you have the war between Zhang Lu and Liu Zhang that you can pick a side in as well. So let's hop into game and just take a quick look at the start and to check out his roster.
战火滔天，华夏受难，将军的领土受创最深。从前的盟友韩遂与您反目，两家的战事绵延多年，难见分晓。然时势所迫，您必须不惜代价。 终结这场战争。曹操和袁绍为争夺北方，以刀兵相见。望将军早日在两雄中做出选择，助其一逐鹿中原。若是待到赢家腾出手来，为时已晚。将军，马超一心想杀曹操而后快。虽然您暂时压制了他的怒火。 但他迟早会脱离我部，擅自行动。张鲁和刘璋互不相让，令巴蜀陷入争斗。此乃天赐良机，将军可以趁双方分身乏术，将更多领土收入囊中。祸乱中原之火愈燃愈烈，将军，请为万民引水救火。
Alrighty, so we got a pretty good introduction actually during that flyby. So Ma Teng, the only slightly inhistorical part of this start is that he was not at a war with Hansui at this time. The two of them did fight periodically, there were territorial disputes, and eventually Hansui would end up killing your wife, and you two would just break completely. But this is not that time yet. At this time, both of you were being courted by both Yuan Shao's side as well as Cao Cao's side. Both of them wanted your help because you border the Hexi region, and you could, definitely swing the favor in, Hedong Commandery and the Chang'an area. So you guys were being courted at this time, and Ma Teng eventually did decide to side with Cao Cao there. We'll see our early game mission is to actually fight Hansui. I think the design of this is to, speed up this conflict because the next time jump we get in chapter pack will be probably when Ma Teng is no longer here, right? Ma Teng eventually goes on to work under Cao Cao after he picked his side here. So this is probably the last time we'll see Ma Teng as the faction leader. And we got to see hints during the beginning dialogue that Ma Chao wants to march on Cao Cao, but you have, stopped him. That's going to hint at Ma Chao eventually attacking Cao Cao and getting you killed, because you now work under Cao Cao, so when Ma Chao rebels, you get executed. And we can see that our first mission is just to fight Han Sui's forces in front of us. It's an empty settlement, and that's it. So we start out with Wudu's capital and the copper mine. Good locations. The silk trader is up ahead. We are definitely interested because gate passes now gives up to 65% boost to adjacent commerce, silk, and spice income. So capturing San Pass or Sanguan over here will give to access to boost for both Wudu as well as Hanzhong with the silk. So that is definitely a new strategy you can utilize, given that Ma Teng's very good with silk income to begin with. So you can make these your key economic cities. So taking this down from Han Sui is probably a wise decision. You probably want to push him back towards Jingcheng and eventually maybe clean him out in the west so you don't have to worry about him ever again. You do have to work on colonization because, as we mentioned, this is all empty. So eventually you have to slowly take that over. It will be quite expensive, in my opinion, to slowly take that over. So perhaps if you could push Han Sui out of Jincheng, take control of it, and leave him alive in Wu Wei, you'll lose out on one of the horse pastures for a little bit, but let him do some of the colonization for you. That's one approach. Two, if you don't mind the expense, then definitely just go ahead and do it. That way you can shift your attention to other sides of the war a bit earlier. Since to the south, there's a gate pass here, and if you want to look for adjacencies, you have to look for roads. So I'm assuming Jiamengguan here does not border Wudu. The road leads it to Hanzhong though, so it would actually count as adjacency for Hanzhong. And to the south, Basi. Basi doesn't have commerce by default. You can build some commerce here and just go commerce and industry, but it's not as good. Hanzhong would be slightly better with the silk boost. So that is also an option for you to extend south, go to war with Zhang Lu, clean him out, take control of some of his land. He has some good ones. He starts out with the weapon county over here, and obviously I think you might as well just expand south. I don't know if going after Cao Cao or Yuan Shao is a better plan. Historically, what happened during this period, first is they're not at war. They were both good regional warlords outside of the influence of the Han court, so technically us being a Han faction is also debatable. Both Han Sui and Ma Teng were Han officers who betrayed their army in a massive coup, and the coup that happened was during the Liang Rebellion, where they were sending men out west to fight them, but there was dispute between their commander, which I believe is Geng Bi during the time, and Geng Bi had a disagreement with one of his officers who was Fu Gan's father, of Fu Si was the officer's name, who recommended him to not march out of the city. I believe that would be Jingcheng at the time, but he didn't listen, went out. There was a coup in the army, and that's when Han Sui and Ma Teng became warlords. They were captains in the army at the time, along with a guy named Wang Guo, who officially led that coup. So I don't think Fu Gan here would hate Ma Teng for it. Ma Teng rose out of that coup as a captain and eventually became his own warlord after Wang Guo kind of led the Liang Rebellion and failed and was replaced by them. Fu Gan actually was a pretty capable advisor, so him as your only strategist makes a lot of sense. During this period in particular, he gave a lot of really good advice. During the coup earlier, during the Liang Rebellion, he was only 13. Okay, we see him as 25 right now, so 188. Yeah, that's probably accurate, him being 25. His advice to Ma Teng during this time was this. Ma Teng was being courted by Cao Cao's officer here out in Chang'an named Zhong Yao, which is Zhong Hui's father, for those of you who know Zhong Hui from closer to the Jin dynasty history. And he was courted also by Gao Gan, as well as Gao Gan's officer, I think name was Guo Yuan, if I'm not mistaken. And he actually already agreed, Ma Teng agreed with Guo Yuan to join Gao Gan and help them out in the Hedong region, because the influence of these forces extended into the Bin province, so they technically should be like here as well. maybe not controlling land, but definitely their influence was in this region. So they would play a factor in this whole area here. And Ma Teng already agreed to help Yuan Shao's side, but then Fu Gan here came up to him and offered him some advice, saying that, right now Yuan Shao and Cao Cao are fighting each other. Cao Cao has the emperor, so technically, if we are talking from a righteous perspective, you should support Cao Cao, but you don't know who will win, right? So natural instinct is say we wait on the sidelines and we observe who wins, but in that situation, most likely it would not matter who wins. We would be the loser in both situations, as the winner would assume that we didn't help them. So my money is we help Cao Cao, and the way we do it is we already agreed with Guo Yuan, right? So we pretend we are marching our armies to go help Gao Gan out here. But then once we get here, we turn on him, we wipe him out, hand the land over to Cao Cao, and then Cao Cao would treasure us and give us a reward. And that's exactly what Ma Teng ended up doing, and it worked out in his favor, as Ma Teng, Ma Tie, Ma Xiu were invited out to Ye, which Cao Cao would set up his government in, as court officials. So they became promoted, and they left Ma Chao in charge of their home territory out west. Unfortunately, Ma Chao would eventually team up with Han Sui, who becomes bitter enemies with Ma Teng after Han Sui would end up killing your wife. And so Ma Chao is going to look past the fact that he killed your mother, work with him, and rebel against Cao Cao, which immediately gets the whole family executed in Ye, because your son is rebelling out west. So that's the situation here. Peng De would be a skilled general under you. He would stick around with Ma Chao to help take care of the land. So if you look at the roster, it's pretty concise in the number of men you have, but everyone's pretty accurate. Fu Gan would stay in the area, good advisor during this period. Ma Teng, Ma Tie, Ma Xiu would move on to become officers under Cao Cao, later get executed together. Wife would eventually die to Han Sui, and Ma Chao takes over. So this is probably the last time we'll see Ma Teng in this area. You get a couple new enemies to start out the situation with, and later on in future DLCs and chapter packs, we're probably going to see Ma Chao take over, and hopefully we'll get a revamped faction mechanic, because honestly, Ma Teng doesn't really have a faction unique resource at this point. We do have some of the coolest units in the game, not only the 3 Teng cavalry unit, but if we build the right buildings, as in our unique Xiliang supply line, we will have access to 3 Teng infantry. So as early as potentially the Northern expansion pack, which should be the next DLC, we might see some changes to them, although I highly doubt the Teng will be the focal point of a Northern expansion pack, since that's mainly, a Xiongnu type of deal. And speaking of the Xiongnu, one of Fu Gan's argument for Ma Teng at this time was for them to go attack Gao Gan. The excuse for them to be righteous on the side of the emperor is that Gao Gan and Yuan Shao at the time worked with the southern Xiongnu tribes and had a lot of mercenaries from them, which is why you see Xiongnu units being recruitable under Yuan Shao. So I don't know if you guys know that, but the old Xiongnu cavalries and the Xiongnu noble cavalry, which is one of Yuan Shao's new unique units that he can recruit, one of the new ones, are all recruitable under Yuan Shao, at least in custom battles. I'm not sure in campaign, but I think it would be in both. And that's because he worked with a lot of those forces in his campaigns in the north. So that's going to be another rationale he's going to use. Your Han officer, your Han faction, you're watching Gao Gan invite, foreign nomads to come here and raid on the emperor's property. So that's another reason why we should join Cao Cao's side. So those were some of the arguments being made at the time. You start out the game with a decent sized army, good generals. Surprising that these two don't get along, but I don't know. I don't know if everyone just hate Ma Chao. That might make more sense, considering that he will cause his death, and then he will eventually split off with him when they were under Zhang Lu. Ma Chao will go off to join Liu Bei. Peng De stays and joins Cao Cao. So yeah, that's fine. Make gameplay a little bit rougher with the satisfaction issue. We don't start out super high, we're just a noble, so we don't have a lot of core positions to play around with, we don't have a lot of bonuses to play around with. Our prestige is quite low, we're far away from second marquis, so that's challenging as well. Reforms, let's see. I hope for a lot of red. Oh wow, okay. The reforms are solid, A+, right? Next spring we get replenishment. We have a lot of satisfaction for Vanguard, which makes sense. We're 1 away from campaign movement range, which is lovely. Another campaign movement range, more redeployment cost discount. Yeah, so this is great. Cataphracts, higher tier horse pastures. So this is a good early investment to start out with. You also have the industry thing going here, which is not bad because there are a lot of tool makers around and copper mines, so that's going to be helpful. This +4 military supplies, I don't know what to say, but okay. I mean, can't have everything. And that's a starting situation. We did mention about the Imperial Intrigue. This is where it might suffer a little bit. You start out quite low, which I guess if you have to make them Han factions, you definitely want to start them low. But it's only going to go lower because you're surrounded by other Han factions, and if you want to expand, you're going to have to fight. And it's going to be difficult for you to increase because you don't have high rank, faction rank. You also don't have, a lot of food in this area, and public order is probably going to be difficult to maintain either. So you can probably barely maintain it with this, or just, take the punishment here. The diplomatic one and corruption's fine in the early game because your total corruption is 0, so increasing it doesn't hurt you. Basically, there'll be 0 multiplied by the 10%, it'd still be 0. The -20, if you're going to be at war with pretty much everyone around you, that's going to be okay. Satisfaction is probably the hardest thing to deal with for you, considering that your faction leader is a Vanguard, so low authority, also missing a lot of skills to help you out. And Ma Chao is your heir, also a Vanguard, also difficult to deal with. You start out the game at 55, so you're probably going to pass away soon if you don't play on Timeless. And that's going to lose you a lot of your discounts for your units, as well as the increased income from Silken Spice. So those are all hard things to deal with playing as Ma Teng. So it's not going to be an easy start here. But it's going to be a fun one because it's one of the few factions that you could use the Teng units. And they're making big changes to fatigue and morale and damage, whereas you're getting punished more for fatigue. Therefore, having a unit that's fatigue immune is going to indirectly make you even stronger, if that makes sense. Because on the new patch, which you guys should see probably next week, you will see that increasing fatigue all the way, till the point where you're exhausted, you will lose like up to 30% of your damage, both armor piercing and base, and you will lose morale, which is new. I think up to 12 points of morale for being exhausted. So that's going to hurt. Therefore, having units that, are immune to that completely is definitely a strong advantage beyond the fact that you can kite, which is usually what you use them for. Now it's like you have extra stat guaranteed throughout the fighting, whereas for other units, fatigues will make them a lot weaker. So that's the quick wrap for Ma Teng's faction. Not going to spend too long on these that didn't get a lot of changes, and hopefully you guys enjoy this one, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye!